thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So glad 2020 is over and everything is fine now! Well, at the very least, it's January, which means if nothing else, we can look forward to a month of best of the year lists, some great recommendations, and some award shows that totally don't matter. And I didn't have to see Minions 2! And what I hesitate to call a silver lining, but I do like how the situation has proven how valuable streaming services are as distribution. I know how much people have been missing movie theaters, but also, don't be in too much of a hurry to jump back into them. We are not out of the COVID woods yet. And that is coming from somebody whom, right before pretty much everything went down, moved into my currently no-noise insulated apartment just to be walking distance from an Alamo Drafthouse. However, when we have a perfectly safe alternative, the question of when it's safe to go back into movie theaters is not in the top 200 things I am concerned about right now. But as for the list, you've probably gotten the impression by now that I've never limited my choices as to what ends up on the list specifically to theatrical studio releases, but given the year, forgive me for not digging through every bargain bin entry this year just to fill out a proper worst film quota, even if they turned out to be not that bad. I've said before that sometimes even drawing attention to a film's existence is honestly more than it deserves, and sometimes the best way to convey how bad a film is to just forget it exists.
Don't let your kids watch it!
Plus, we could all agree that Mulan is an honorary worst. So in terms of my worst of the year, this is merely the worst that I was willing to sit through.
You are what you eat, so have some fruit every day, keep the doctor away. You are what you eat, you are what you eat.
I think this movie may share a record with New Mutants for how many times it's been delayed. I've been seeing this movie on yearly animated lists for years, until it finally dropped on Netflix with a resounding thunk. So if anything, I felt it at least deserved a pity watch. Animal Crackers is a celebrity-stuffed international co-production about a former circus performer finding a box of animal crackers that when consumed will turn them into that animal. Which is cute enough on its own, but just the number of uninteresting characters and subplots that are squeezed into this did not do it any favors, when the actual main family are kind of adorable. But to give it some of its due, it's certainly not Food Fight or Norm of the North. I did at least appreciate what started as an eye-rolling guy cares more about what his father-in-law thinks of him than his wife plot. Midway through, his wife finally knocks that petty motivation out of his system and then tells his father-in-law to eat his ass. Because seriously, you're already married with a daughter. Who cares what he thinks? But there really are so many side characters that I don't care about. And it actually has a kinda neat climax where not just a bunch of characters turn into a bunch of animals for elaborate fun chase scenes, they play with the idea that eating part of a cracker will just give you that animal part. So what if you ate the parts of a whole bunch of different cookies? It was pretty painful at the start with Ian McKellen being an incredibly cringy villain. I do like seeing a happy family unit where all the members are active participants in the story and working together, but that's about it.
Reboot it, renew it, reshoot it, redo it, and reuse it, retool it, abuse it, just view it.
Spongebob probably wins this year for biggest disappointment. Its honestly great animation just served to highlight the complete lack of effort put into its meandering hodgepodge of a story. I possibly could have given it slightly more credit in my review than I did for its action-esque climax with the suit of armor, and the characters' dedications to SpongeBob are as touching as they are insufficiently motivated. What starts off as just a story to get Gary back somehow spirals into this SpongeBob worship all of a sudden. Its entire creation being a not pilot for the SpongeBob Camping Babies spin-off does not help. If someone said that they liked this movie for the visuals alone, I would kind of get where they were coming from. There are undoubtedly some nice looking moments and some okay physical comedy, which absolutely in no way can make up for the complete and utter lack of comedy in the dialogue, which honestly is the real death nail of the movie. It's just not especially funny. The first SpongeBob movie has more zany, joy, humor, and energy in the first 5 minutes than this one does in the entire runtime.
Disney Senpai, please no Disney Senpai, please no Disney Senpai.
Nope, check that. This is the year's biggest disappointment. As many can attest from my 2020 trailer video, this movie got me excited just for my emotional connection to its original title alone. Roughly simplified to, I cry because there's a cat on my face. Not a direct translation, but close enough. And there are some things I like in this film. It is certainly beautifully animated, and conceptually, I really like the lore and subtle magic they create with the turning into animals via mask. Man, this really has been the year of the furries. And I love the cat tree. It is easily the best segment of the entire film, partly because it finally puts some focus on some characters that are not the protagonist. But I can't stand the rest of it. You all already know that I'm pretty hard to please when it comes to romance, but oh boy, this one made me want to apologize to last year's I Wanna Eat Your Pancreas. Because for that one, well, I personally disliked its concept from the get-go, but over the course of the film, it managed to tell its story well enough that I was able to warm up to it little by little until the end. Still not a huge fan, but it is a massive improvement to Whisker, where the titular romance just keeps tumbling downward. Already from the trailer, it had some stalkery vibes where the girl turns herself into a cat so she can spend time with her crush, and that never stops being off-putting. And that's where she's at her most likable. Because when she's a human, she's constantly getting in his face and shoving her butt against him. Literally. Admitting part of my dislike comes from a certain amount of personal discomfort, which is pretty much any story where overly extroverted people really get overly friendly with clearly uncomfortable introverted people. No regards to others' feelings, especially when they keep saying that it's out of love. But for a second, I thought that they were gonna subvert this. She makes a note that she's unhappy with her home life, so she's gonna marry her crush and they're gonna go off and make their own family with blackjack, which could have been incredibly meaningful, relaying how people can become obsessed with or inconvenience others when they're really upset about something personal. But nope, it's true love at, 12? And then the movie tries to make us feel sorry for her when he finally stands up for himself. Sure, in that exact moment, he could have handled the moment a little bit better and aimed his frustration technically at the wrong person, but it would have been completely justified if he had picked literally any other moment. But oh, if that was it, because spoilers, because I don't care about this movie to care, he eventually does learn about what she's done, turning into a cat to essentially stalk him, and then goes, gee, for someone to invade my privacy and get all up in my business without my consent, I guess that means she really cares about me. I guess that also means I like her too for no goddamn reason. F this. Oh, and then in the climax, they fight a big fat cat that goes on for so unbelievably painfully long, but it's also possible that at that point I was just dying for this movie to be over. Because of the fantasy elements and the animation, I can't honestly put it any lower, which really is a shame because I really do love the cat tree. And I can understand people being more enthralled with its cat fantasy elements than turned off by its not romance. But if you want a low-key romance with a dash of magical realism that's not quite as ambitious but with way more likable characters, look up Her Blue Sky when it's finally released. Aoi's sister breaks up with her high school guitar-playing boyfriend Shino to take care of her when their parents die. 13 years later, they find Shino's playing in a local tourism band, but Aoi finds his teenage spirit in her shed, and he's not happy with what's become of his adult self, setting up a series of awkward, complicated feelings between the various Shinos and the relationship between the sisters themselves. It's pretty, it's cute, it's pondering, it's written by Mari Okada, who did Anohana and Anthem of the Heart. So, case closed.
I'm a hex girl, and I'm gonna put a spell on you.
I'll give it that Scoob is at least more regularly funny than Spongebob, better at its narrative structure, and its emotional motives are clear even if they are basic. Similarly, the inspiration to make this movie seems to be a gateway to make other things, but it does a way better job at standing on its own 2 feet even if that ends up not happening. It generally looks great for making essentially a CGI cartoon, as most of the films on this list do, especially when it comes to its Looney Tunes cartoony physical hijinks, but in the end, this is more of a superhero Hana-babera crossover special than it is a Scooby-Doo movie with its only light touches of mystery and almost complete lack of horror. But at the very least, it does succeed well enough at being an okay crossover. Dick Dastardly is a really fun villain.
Dick
Not Astro's quips are funny because they're mostly targeted at the Blue Fountain, who honestly could have been drop-kicked from this movie and lost nothing. It's honestly up to the viewer to decide whether all of the blatant gimmickry is really a problem for them, but aside from the painfully routine third act breakup in the narrative, the big sin that pretty much everyone agrees upon is the celebrity voice hijacking and screwing over the original cast, and that Velma never says jinkies. Still, the ending is kinda sweet and the animation is fluid and fun, so it's a mixed bag. So, back in my trailers of 2020 video, boy, that sure aged well, I said that the feedback of Children of the Sea, the recent production by Studio 4C of Mind Game and MFKZ fame, was yet another film that was neat and even very beautiful to look at, human designs permitting, but story-wise was a bit confusing, and yup. It starts out simple enough following a girl named Ruka as she meets two mysterious boys that are found by the sea that are able to breathe underwater undergoing a series of experiments. Well, I know this is a bit reductive, but as it goes on, it feels like the film is gradually getting high. The visuals get more abstract and gorgeous, and the dialogue turns into various monologues that basically boil down to, reality and science just a matter of perception, man. What if our space is some other world's ocean, bro? And at some point you realize you have no idea what's going on or how you got here, but it's just real pretty, so you just hang on there until the end. There is actually a relatively linear plot involving the origin of the boys and their relationship to Ruka that still gets pretty out there, but that is what it feels like watching it. That last act is a real trip, and it is certainly a unique experience. I can't say that I've been the biggest fan of the latest continuity of DC animated films inspired by the now very dated New 52 comic run, kicked into existence by the Flashpoint film, which is one of my favorites, mostly due to the existence of an entity I have oh so subtly referred to as Shitbag Damien, and also because its versus movies were largely cop-outs. So it was a bit relieving to hear that Dark Apocalypse would be ending this run, making way for a new continuity. And it certainly goes out with a very violent and lethal bang. These films did generally increase the action's brutality and older subject matter. Its adaptation of the Judas Contract included that lovely comic detail where Tara really wants to bang Deathstroke, and yet its end is so much tamer than when Teen Titans did it. Here, Apocalypse just lays waste to the majority of superheroes before even the opening title sequence, and then proceeds to turn many of them into cyborg slaves as a ragtag team of survivors team up with villains to finally take him down. And it's a pretty good send-off for those that have kept up with this string of films, focusing on the characters that have gotten the most attention, so pretty much Superman, Batman, Constantine, and Damian, because everyone rightly forgot that Throne of Atlantis happened. And while I frequently didn't care for Shitbag Damien, I did notice his gradual progression through the films to become less of a shitbag, culminating in this film where he is at his least shitbaggy, which did give the experience a good sense of completion, even if I still don't care for this incarnation of Raven. The beginning may feel like a bit of a crawl, but it is a very satisfying climax. Then the new continuity began with Man of Tomorrow, a new Superman origin story focusing on his choice on whether to come out to the public as an alien, and putting specific emphasis on his allegory of being an immigrant. Gee, I wonder what event from the previous years might have influenced that creative decision. And I already greatly prefer this art style, where the characters' expressions can actually change occasionally in a shot, and it feels like there's a bit more time spent on character than in the previous movies. The exchanges with his parents are endearing, and the film opens with this heartbreaking scene of Clark crying when his friend gets scared at an evil alien in an old sci-fi movie. Representation matters, damn it! And this version showcases not just Superman's strength, but his tendency for strategy and empathy. And I certainly can't prove that this movie's title, Man of Tomorrow, is a direct parallel and potential call-out and even middle finger to Snyder's Man of Steel, but that's certainly my headcanon. I really did like this one, and I really look forward to what the rest of the films in this continuity will be like. And yes, there were other standalone DC films that came out this year that were also in the range of acceptably enjoyable. Deathstroke Knight and Dragons was about, well, Deathstroke saving his son with one of the more involved wife characters that I've seen in a superhero film, and Superman Red Sun, the adaptation of the renowned Elseworlds story of what if Superman grew up in Russia instead of Kansas. An interesting watch for those who don't already know the story, but it does involve a man-hating Wonder Woman and a lot of American democracy wanking. And for those who really liked the original comic, it's largely the same, but apparently both the art and the story have been somewhat simplified. The art, certainly. It's still a decent retelling, but it's not exceptional.
I'm a little bit country.
And I'm a little bit rock and roll.
Yeah, I'm kinda surprised too. Trolls World Tour ended up aging way better than I thought it would. I was pretty nice to the first one, and honestly this one has a bit more going for it. Using the genres of music as a metaphor for culture, Barb and Poppy being the representations of hard versus soft international relations, while also doing a decent job at representing cultural appropriation. I was genuinely impressed, even at the end of the day that doesn't do that much to impact the story itself. And Barb. Barb is amazing, and I love her, and she throws shade on the power of friendship angle. It's just fantastic. I also like Branch being the voice of reason, as well as Poppy revealed to be a bit close-minded and bigoted. Most of the high points are in the big concept, but it is generally competently scripted, and the way that the animation brings to life this craft world in all of its minute details, I still cannot get over this shot. Honestly, the biggest problem is that you have to deal with a lot of these typical staples of mainstream animation. You have to have all of these obligatory, condescending, child-pandering moments with all of these characters you don't care about, and Willoughby's feels like it doesn't need to make a joke unless it actually thinks it's funny. It does need to be noted, however, that given its big reveal, that its music philosophy is a bit hypocritical. All about diversity of music and not letting the pop trolls just hijack their stuff, but all of the music used in this movie are the most pop versions of all of these genres. That, and the ending is basically a copy of the first movie. Not quite worth all of the theater drama it initiated.
This is my sister.
This is my brother.
We are siblings and we care for each other. Everything we own,
We always share
because we are siblings and we have the same hair.
I really like the idea of what the Willoughbys is. Those offbeat indie features that go just a smidge further into the dark and macabre than the mainstream ones will. The look is unique with its geometric magenta tinge and its almost looking like stop motion, and involves children's attempt to murder their parents. It's right there in the vein of similar darker family films like Coraline and Matilda, Willy Wonka, and Series of Unfortunate Events. Almost. This will definitely be appreciated in the family market circles as a fun deviation from the norm, but what ultimately keeps this from joining the priors as classics is just that the child characters do not leave a very strong impression and do not have a very strong bond with each other for most of the movie. Also, giving the girl a song to sing at the very end that's supposed to be the heartfelt punch of the movie feels a little try-hard and predictably saccharine. In this case, its success is mostly going to depend entirely on the song's quality. Still, it is undeniably a fun watch. I could watch those awful parents almost die over and over. And inversely to Trolls, its ending makes this film. Because given its concept, this ending needed to be handled just right. And I believe it succeeded.
Robot versions of themselves are streaming in a video game. You know what I mean if you had seen the cattle drive the time machine, the giant paper pelican plane.
I don't usually include movies based on animated series just because that opens the door to include, like, twice as many movies, but not that that really matters because at the end of the day, I just want to talk about what I want to talk about anyway. One of my great animated sins, but I have in fact not seen that much Phineas and Ferb. Or else yes, Doofenshmirtz definitely would have made it onto the best animated dads list. But I have certainly enjoyed what I have seen and all of the films. I always advocate for the musicals, especially when they've got competent music writers. Doofenshmirtz steals the show as usual with his chicken laser gimmick, and the adulting song was something that we desperately needed, and appreciated the heavy involvement of his daughter Vanessa. They've got their great humor as always, including the ultra meta joke, and it was refreshing to tell the story from Candace's point of view and examining her relationship with her brothers, and her obsession with constantly trying to get them in trouble, even though Vanessa calls it out in pretty much the first 5 minutes. And because apparently my main thing in this video is to shove even more films into tangentially related sections so I don't have to make new ones, as action-packed and financially successful as Hiroaka's Heroes Rising movie was, most fans honestly would have traded this movie's existence for a better season 4. Generally appreciated the concept of just letting us see Class 1A do more cool stuff instead of always focusing on the same 3 characters, but then ending with a really cool idea that it of course has to backtrack on instantly because it's filler. I also want to make a brief shout out to Lupin the First, which story-wise I could just quickly abbreviate as Lupin Does Indiana Jones. CGI application is excellent. Great 3D cartoon antics with amazing character designs.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, they're the modern Stone Age family.
Yeah, remember Croods 2? Remember how much we were all looking forward to Croods 2? And how impressed we were on how it achieved the biggest box office of the pandemic Thanksgiving weekend? I can only guess that this was an apology to theaters for World Tour. But thanks to its hurried VOD release, Croods 2 is relatively similar to how I felt about the first one. Wasn't exactly memorable, but pretty good. Initially, the story concept I wasn't crazy about. Grug is still being irritated at the fact that his daughter has a boyfriend. Yeah, this again, but then we come across the Bettermans who see the Croods as a bunch of savage cave people and try to maneuver Caveman Deadpool into marrying their daughter. Wow, it's almost like this was tailor-made to piss me off. But after I got over that initial retching response, this is DreamWorks' fast comedic animation and great expression work at the forefront of a smorgasbord of beautiful scenery. At the time, its world design was compared to Avatar, but honestly, I think this one has a little bit of an edge. Certainly in color variety. The director said he specifically didn't want this to feel like an hour-and-a-half Flintstones episode, and he succeeded. It doesn't, because they're living in a tree and not rocks. But it does feel particularly distinct. The Bettermans are so condescendingly passive-aggressive people that I could not wait for them to get eaten, but thankfully in an entertaining, I don't hate that you're on screen kind of way. And I was so grateful that Eat formed a genuine friendship with their daughter Dawn, and doesn't take her parents' awful behavior out on her. Because one thing I was baffled by in the first Croods was that it had a greater ratio of female characters that almost never talk to each other. An issue that is greatly rectified in this film with its big woman rescue mission that does feel a little like it's patting itself on the back a bit too much about it, but it does give Mrs. Betterman a proper arc, so its existence is justified. The film may not have the same emotional blows at the end as the first one did, but its comedy and animation, while studio standard, keeps it engaging until its kinda brain mash of a finale. The Punch Monkeys and their translation process are easily the comedic highlight of the film, and as a typical staple of family dramas, there's a big confrontational blowout over a dinner table that is exceptionally well-timed and incredibly cathartic. For a conventional studio family comedy from DreamWorks, I'm pretty okay with this. I usually try to make an effort to look at the foreign entries of each year, or more than just Japan, but are often difficult to find, and usually there's a broad gap between the release date and the actual overseas release. I really wanted to see Bombay Rose until they delayed it. But I did want to check out the film that has now completely dominated the Chinese animated box office away from Kung Fu Panda and Monkey King, Ne Zha, which is presently available on Netflix. And semi-suiting since it is the prequel, or rather exists in the same cinematic universe as Jiangxia, which technically did come out this year but isn't available yet. And from what I've seen, China makes animated films and works based on its own mythology and famous works of literature in the same vein and frequency as Disney does based on fairy tales, with the same level of accuracy. A lot of stories about gods, immortals, demons, reincarnation, magic, animals that take human form that people have sex with, a lot of that. Ne Zha is based off a real mythological figure of the same name, or rather one that was adapted from India, I think. But this one opts for a much more creative retelling. To try and speed through its setup, the gods are in possession of a good spirit pearl and a demon pearl. The plan is to destroy the demon pearl and reincarnate the good pearl in the child of a general, but then the spirit pearl gets stolen by the king of the dragons, that he wants to put in his own son so he will become a god and free the rest of the dragons being chained at the bottom bottom of the ocean. And instead, the demon pearl gets planted in the general's child. The boy grows up powerful and tempestuous, but only slightly more aggressive than the average grade schooler. Except that everyone around him is constantly afraid of him, assuming that he is a demon. And ergo, treats him pretty terribly, and his parents actively try to keep him away from everyone. And the first person he comes across that can fight him equally and doesn't treat him like crap is this mysterious, equally powerful young man with dragon horns. Gee, I hope nothing happens that would cause these two friends to have to fight each other. So if Bakugo was raised as Naruto, or Paranorman. As such, there's a rough but decent balance between believable childlike sociopathy, his own greed, anger, and impulses sowing the seeds of his own misfortune, but also a lot of sympathy for him as a lot of his situation is exacerbated by the mishandling of the adults around him. I mean, he definitely shouldn't have laid out a crowd of unpowered humans for trying to impotently beat him up, but you get why, and he is a child. But not quite enough for his eventual turnaround to feel natural. But when we get to the climax and it just goes completely ham on the magic and the martial arts, it blows most superhero films out of the water, though with some of the similar issues regarding too much aerial combat and 360 shots. And while its themes of nature versus nurture and prejudice are not remotely connected to the original story, this movie was greatly embraced by its audience. And on a personal note, it was kind of neat to see him get into his final form, and then to have it suddenly click. Oh, it's Edgelord Nataku from Soul Hunter, one of my very first anime that absolutely nobody has heard of. And indeed, that series is loosely based on the same novel and that character. Not Haikyuu Hoshinengi, that hack reboot. Even though it looks better, I'm going to eviscerate you one day. And in fact, the next movie's Zhangzia is the character that anime's main character is based off of. I also want to quickly mention the Whitesnake animated film that was released on Amazon relatively recently, which would be somewhat lower on the list because its characters are kind of flat. Which also takes massive liberties from the myth, or more specifically, it is a prequel, but it is in the same genre of immortals and demons and magic, only this time it's a love story, and the big bombastic climax features an army of snake kaiju. So, you know, if that's your thing.
Would miss all the places and people I love, so although I might like it for one afternoon, I don't want to live on the moon.
It's some odd twitch of fate, either ironic or fitting, that the studio formerly known or associated with Oriental DreamWorks teams up with a Disney animator veteran, Glenn Keane, to create essentially a Disney movie with about half the budget. But not a knockoff in the same way that, say, Swan Princess was. A young, someday spacebound girl named Fei-Fei hears from her mother the Chinese myth of the moon goddess, who, when ingesting an immortality potion, elevated to the moon, leaving her lover behind, depicted here in a gorgeous 2D animated sequence. But years later, when she fears her father might get remarried and forget her late mother, she builds a rocket to go to the moon and meet the moon goddess to prove true love exists. I think just child logic. My parents won't do this thing if I do this completely unrelated thing. And thankfully, in contrast to the expectations of a certain snarky commenter, and myself somewhat, the first trailer did not in fact spoil the entire movie because I did not actually expect her to make it to the moon. Or I expected it to be more explicitly a dream sequence, where she meets the best character in the movie, moon goddess Chang'e, played by Hamilton's Eliza, Philippa So. It's pretty evident that this movie was made by a Disney animator, as its visuals leave the strongest impressions of the film, and contains a lot of familiar Disney bullet points and attributes, just on a much small, simpler scale. There is a girl with a dream who accumulates a oddly larger cast of both animal and comedic sidekicks. Why are the Angry Birds here? And is a flourishing musical encompassing a variety of genres, naturally including an I Want song, a multicast introduction to this world song, the best song coming from the closest thing this movie has to a villain, and the one from the comic relief that 180s the movie's tone and is just weird enough that it sticks in your mind. A ping pong rap is an interesting choice, still better than Fixer Upper, and just goes to show that if you want to aptly reflect Chinese culture, maybe you should actually get some Chinese filmmakers to make it. The legend in this movie of the moon goddess is after all a real Chinese myth, and the arguments the families have are apparently real various interpretations people have about the myth, and contains a touching, melancholy theme about being able to let go of your lost loved ones. Sure, it's Disney-esque, but not quite up there with the classics. The last introduced comic relief, a lot of screen time, and unfortunately is one of those situations where they try to pass off annoying as funny, and then immediately tries to make that character wholeheartedly endearing. And musically, I think that all of the songs are well constructed, but the lyrics are a little bit too obvious and predictable. Still, it's more than apt to call this film both adorable and charming. The natural consequence of Pixar's reputation is now everything they make that isn't a masterpiece basically gets the reputation of being forgettable trash, when it otherwise would have been in the middle or even top half of other studios. Or is it just that the Pixar formula has become so familiar, unless it sandbags us with something original, it just doesn't leave a very long-lasting impression? Onward is a very simple, sweet family film through a fantasy-esque lens, but it is kinda hard to remember a lot of what happens in it, because the fantasy elements are pretty light, and the world feels just a little bit too normal. But this film does gain momentum as it goes on. There's a question on whether or not it's almost deliberately boring at the beginning and then gradually becomes more interesting and magical as more magic is integrated into the story, that I guess worked a little bit too well. And I do like stories about siblings. And ultimately, this film is a master of narrative setup and payoff, because the ending is everything. Every magic spell established is utilized in an impressive magic battle. The film succeeds in laying a very subtle groundwork of small details and gestures that come together to make a very satisfying, bittersweet conclusion. But being a relatively simple and small-scale film, it was to its benefit that it went to Disney Plus early, so that it would adjust the expectations somewhat. After all, it is much more suiting to see a film like this in a homely, family, intimate setting than a grand theater necessarily. It is ultimately doomed to be one of those films that you can never quite remember when you're trying to list off Pixar films in order, but it's ultimately so heartfelt and charming that I will fight for it if I have to. Your standard anime tough guy that everyone fears but is actually kind of a nice dude decides to start a band, and impresses everyone around them with their ability to hit one note over and over again. I feel like I'd have much more to say about this if I knew anything about classic rock. I'm not even sure if that's the right term to use. There's definitely some visual references I'm not getting. But as a general fan of music, it's all great, and as a fan of animation, it may not look like much at first, but it is nice to see a different style come out of Japan, and one that puts a bigger emphasis on movement, which you need to showcase all of that glorious headbanging. Saving the budget for its music scenes is absolutely the right call, but even its simplistic animation early on adds to its comedy. Tone-wise, this is very Napoleon Dynamite. There's long stretches of not much happening, but then suddenly something happens. It's the randomness and the ridiculous moments being played completely straight, aided by the contrast of everyone's deadpan, emotionless faces and their monotone voices, and then how hard they go during the music scenes, which elicits various styles of surreal psychedelic imagery, some of which feels very Yellow Submarine. And I have never seen a movie give so much love to the recorder. If anything, its simple design is disarming to have you not expect much from it, and then you come away going, huh, that was oddly fun. Reportedly one of the darkest, most disturbing animated films ever created. I've seen Bird Boy, I'll be the judge of that. Why was there a Cars poster in the corner? The Wolf House premiered on Shudder last week, and it very much deserves to be there. A girl, Maria, runs away from a German colony in Chile based on a real colony composed of many former Nazis as just one of the kinds of terrible people inhabiting it. It's a surreal unfolding of Maria's mental state, not just about the trauma she carries with her, but how those experiences are passed on to others through her. But then you see it. Maria runs away to a house, and the entire film, barring the mockumentary opening that talks about how awesome this totally not sinister colony is, takes place entirely within the house as one continuous shot, moving from room to room, sometimes through the walls, originally starting as paintings on the walls that eventually manifest into three-dimensional figures, sometimes painting on glass and moving that through the space. Composed of cheap materials that you would find in a closet or an attic like plastic or masking tape, this movie is like 50% masking tape. You see wires, you see paint running down the walls, you clearly see how each painting on the wall is being painted and then painted over. You see even the 3D characters wilt and lose shape over time. You also almost never enter a room with the characters already existing there. Every time you move into a new space, you see everything being constructed from the ground up and then finessed and then deconstructed constantly. It hits that part of your brain that lights up at sped up art making videos and indie horror game playthroughs. This took them over 5 years to make, and it was flipping amazing to watch. Now, as a story, there is a voiceover, but only comes in once in a while. Most of the movie is its imagery and its metaphor and its fairy tale logic. In this case, a very twisted take on the three little pigs and the wolf.
The wolf is coming from inside the house.
But even when I couldn't fully get it, I loved watching this film. Loving Vincent might have been an accomplishment, but this was a truly original experience, and I was fully engaged. But is it darker than Bird Boy? Given its inspiration and look, you'd think so. And clearly it's going to be viewer dependent, but for me, Wolf House was ultimately so fascinating to just look at, and its narrative was ultimately so sparse, that while I was certainly unnerved, I can honestly say that I enjoyed watching it. Whereas Bird Boy, for as nice looking as it is an hour and change of pure dread and hopelessness. I would watch Wolf House 5 times over before I'd willingly watch Bird Boy again. Now, about the best of the year. The real purpose of a worst to best ranking is that it's a fun thought exercise, and like top 10 lists, really only serves as an easily recognizable and clickbaity organizational system that serves an excuse to talk about all the films I want to talk about. And ceases to be fun when we agonize too much over a particular order of a highly subjective process that changes every couple of minutes. As such, I do declare that both Soul and Wolfwalkers be deemed the best of the year, as both of these are absolutely gorgeous, exceptional movies about personal transformation, figurative and literal. Wolfwalkers is my unquestioned new favorite of all of Cartoon Saloon's adventures in Irish history and mythology. It has its stellar 2D unique animation depicting its city with perspective skewing, confining spaces and sharp corners, and its forest as organic and lush and colorful. It's beautiful wolf transformation sequences with abundance of Celtic accents and painstaking fluid POV wolf shots. Soul is outstanding with its impeccably detailed, lived-in, non-touristy New York, contrasting with its ethereal before-afterlife, as well as its meditative visualization for the feelings aroused by music and jazz, and most amazingly, these utterly fantastic abstract deity creatures that I cannot get enough of. CGI is not just about photorealism, guys! Wolfwalkers is an endearing friendship story between two girls from two cultures in an English-occupied Ireland, both of whom are eager for adventure and to emulate their beloved parents, while their parents seek to tame their wild impulses and shelter them from the cruelties of life. Soul is a literal life-affirming tale about a man who almost dies, but not, through the eyes of a before-life soul trying to figure out who they are. I find I like the relationship and the bond between the two main characters a bit better in Wolfwalkers, and Maeve is just my favorite out of everyone. And Soul is a great example of a movie that utilizes a lot of familiar film premises and ideas, just told in a way that makes them feel fresh and innovative by taking a different direction and exploring the relationship between people and their passions, and leaves the audience with an amazing sense of inspiration and optimism. However, a certain percentage did find its ending a little underwhelming, and I've already made a video on how I feel about that whole thing. Whereas Wolfwalker's story is a bit more recognizable with a handful of slow moments when the children have to do what their parents say and not do anything, which has the predictable effect on the film, but it does have a very satisfying ending and definitely feels like a complete package. Just one that's not quite as narratively ambitious. It's not just that these two films are so clearly the best animated films of the year. For whatever minuscule point difference there might be between them, it's how many miles better they are than everyone else. You are both wonderful, you are both worthy, but we know which one by the big conglomerate is going to get the lion's share of attention at award season. And just letting you know that Cartoon Saloon's next animated feature is called My Father's Dragon, and I am already excited. And now it's finally time to let the 2020 jokes die and make some genuine effort to make 2021 the best we can, even if it has already proven to be 2020's hangover year. So tell me, Animaniacs, what was your worst to best ranking? And thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes from art to music to business to freelancing, personal productivity, and of course, film and animation. Indulging in or experimenting with something new and creative is a great way to break up your routine and keep yourself healthy and engaged, especially if it's a passion or skill that you've wanted to try but never knew where or how to start. The classes are mostly less than an hour, so are easily manageable and frequently come with resources as well as projects to get your wheels turning, creating an ideal environment to explore and learn. So no ads, and they are always adding new classes and subjects. The animation section especially has a large array of tutorials and courses suited for a variety of skill levels, programs, and concepts. And of course, one of the crucial stages when making an animated project that is sometimes undervalued is storyboarding. Storyboarding for animation with Sarah Beth Morgan is a great course for marking out the steps detailing your animated project, from conceptualizing the look to how to frame a scene to fit the narrative to emphasizing images that suggest motion. But a factor that some don't always think about is how to design and format your work in a way that makes it easily comprehensible and workable for your client and other people working on the project. Because ideally, it won't just be you one day working on this, you'll be working with a studio, or at least with other people, and you'll need a circle of feedback and confirmation. And she provides a lot of helpful tips for those trying to keep that in mind. And I'm sure you'll find something that will help and inspire you too. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Thank you all, and see you next time, Animaniacs!
Here is a dumpster fire. Probably won't be sober till this year is over. But here is a dumpster fire. We're not even mentioning the flippin' election. Birds picking up sharks, Broadway going dark. Giant star disappears after like 1 billion years. Prince Harry quit the fam a month before a global pandemic shut the world down. None of us will leave our town.